Hey guys! In today's video, I wanted to talk about how I personally draw eyes and some tips and tricks that I have for you. And I have been asked quite a couple of times how I draw eyes just because a lot of people like the way I do it because they make them very big and expressive. So yeah, here are going to be my tips. And first off, I wanted to say that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. So thank you so much to them for making it possible for me to put in a little bit more time to explain this for you guys. If you don't know what Skillshare is, it's an online learning community with thousands of classes in design, art, business, entrepreneurship, all that kind of stuff. Premium membership will give you unlimited access to all of their classes, and you just pay a monthly subscription and you can watch and participate in different kinds of classes. So I kind of explain it as a little bit more in-depth than YouTube, but a little bit less than a college class, so somewhere in the middle. And you can just see right now on the screen, these are some of the classes that I've been watching recently. So if you'd like to check Skillshare out, I will be having a free 2-month trial for the first 500 people who will sign up for the class. The link is going to be down in the description right at the top, so feel free to go check it out and have some fun learning some new stuff. So the first thing that I recommend is that you think of an eye as an eyeball that's a spherical shape, and that you think of the pupil and the iris being on a certain axis. If you think of the eye as an eyeball, like a sphere, then you're going to think of the eyelid wrapping around the surface of that sphere, and it's going to make it easier to draw the curvature of the eyelids as well as all the folds and where the tear ducts are. It's also going to be very beneficial for you learning the different bone structure of the eye socket and how the eyebrow is positioned and all of the kind of the ins and outs literally of where the eyeball is placed on the face. Once you think of the iris and the pupil on an axis, it's going to be easier to draw the eye on the x-axis to find out where the eyelids will meet at the ends and where the top of the eyelid will be on the y-axis. Since the pupil and the iris kind of come out a little bit from the eyeball, the highest point on the eyelids is going to be right above where the iris and the pupil are. Whichever way the person is looking, I always make sure to have the eyelid curving around that area. So after drawing a couple of eyes on their axis, you're not going to actually need to just draw an actual circle with an axis and then the step-by-step as I just showed you. You're going to be able to draw it without that structure underneath. So the way that I draw it is I always start with the inner corner and then I draw the outer corners of the eyes and will always connect to the middle. I don't actually draw like one big sweeping line all across. I'll just do the inner corner and then the outer corner, connect that in the middle, draw the lower inner corner and the lower outer corner, then the creases, and then where the waterline is, then I draw the iris with the pupil, some highlights, and it's also important to remember that the upper eyelid will cast a shadow down over the eye. So a lot of the time, the top part of the iris is going to be much darker than the bottom of the iris, and the top of the whites of the eyes is gonna curve with the spherical shape of the eyeball, and it's going to be in shadow a little bit. You should also leave room for the lacrimal caruncle. I don't know if I even said that right, but that's basically the tear ducts, the inner corner of the eye. The top and bottom eyelids won't connect to a perfect straight angle. They're going to kind of curve a little bit to allow room for the tear duct, and also the tear duct is kind of separated into two a lot of the times, as you can see from my drawing. It's not really important to draw, but if you're drawing it up close, I just add that detail sometimes. Remembering that there is a waterline, it gives depth to the eyelids and to the thickness of them. You remember that it's actually a flap of skin that covers the eye. That just sounds really gross. But it will give dimension to the eyelids, both the top and the bottom eyelids. So drawing a little shadow underneath the bottom eyelid in the inner corner as well as a little bit on the outer corner will help give a little bit of dimension, as well as adding a shadow on the outer corner of the top eyelid and also on the inner corner a little bit. It will also help give that illusion of a curved surface. When drawing eyelashes, it's important to remember that you're drawing individual hairs that are coming from the waterline, and each hair will come out at a perpendicular angle to its surface. So remembering that axis that you drew, the outer parts of the whites of the eyes are going to be more sunken in the very front of the eye. As I'm drawing, for example, on the outer corner, the eyelashes are going to point right because the curvature of the eyeball is such that it would be at a perpendicular angle to point that way, but in the very middle of the eye, the eyelashes are going to sort of point towards the viewer and they're going to curve a little bit. And also a way to make them look a little bit more realistic is to foreshorten them a little bit. So the ones that are pointing towards the viewer, you know, in this drawing, they're going to be a little bit shorter looking when you draw them because they're not sticking straight up. You know, you're kind of creating an illusion that they're facing towards you and curving upward a little bit rather than just going straight up. It's also important to remember to add a little bit of variation in the shape, the size, and the length of each eyelash to create a more natural look rather than having them all look completely uniform like false lashes. Lastly, when drawing the eye, I think it's really important to remember that the eyebrow and sort of the bone structure around the eyeball will shape how the face looks a lot. I'm also going to be showing you how I color in the eye with just some basic values. So I'm going to use just a mid-tone color. The inner corner, there's going to be a little bit more glossiness there. Then the brow bone, there's going to be a highlight there. Below the brow and right over the brow, as well as under the eye, right under the shadow created by the eyelid, there is going to be a little bit more glossiness as well. You can add shadows to the eyelids above both corners of the eyelids, the inner and the outer corner, as well as the top and the bottom eyelids. And it's also important for you to look at reference photos and try to replicate them and see how the eye works and figure it all out for yourself. I'm just telling you what I've learned, but it's very hard for me to explain because I'm not good at explaining things. But I've noticed that whenever I add highlights to the eye, I won't really use white. I'll use an off-white for the brightest highlights and just a little bit of a lighter tone for the other highlights on the face. I like to add one bold highlight on the iris and then another highlight right under the pupil on the opposite side of where I just added a highlight. It's going to be a little bit more diffused and faded, but if you see how the light will catch eyes in different lighting situations, it's going to kind of go through the lens of the eye and hit the other side of the eye, if you know what I'm saying. It's like just gonna pass through. It's a pretty look and I think it's cool to add to your pieces. Also adding a little bit of wetness to the edge of the iris as well as the waterline and to the tear duct are interesting touches so that it makes the eyeball look a little bit more wet. Whenever I draw eyes that are closed, it's a little bit difficult to do it properly, and I know that I don't do it properly all the time and just kind of wing it and hope for the best. I will leave a little bit of a curve for the tear duct and then go down to like that C shape that everybody draws whenever they're drawing eyes that are closed. And then afterwards, I always make sure to keep adding where the crease would be anyway, because the eyeball does recede into the skull as well as the actual bone coming out. There's also going to be a little bit of a dent right there, so I like to accentuate that with a little bit of a shadow. Next, I'll just talk about how I draw eyes so that they can sort of match. One thing that I always do is I make sure to not draw one beautiful perfect eye to begin with and then try to replicate it on the other side. I try to work slowly on both eyes at once. So if I draw the upper eyelid for one eye, I'll draw the upper eyelid for the other one, make sure it looks good. Then I start drawing different things like the lower eyelid for one eye and then the lower eyelid for the other one. Finish that, move on to drawing the irises and the pupil for one, iris and pupil for the other, that kind of stuff. So I just work step by step through the whole process for both eyes at the same time. And it's much easier to make sure that both of them are looking similar and they're looking good, and it's much easier to erase at this point rather than drawing and painting one eye and then having to go in and do the same for the other eye. Because sometimes I kind of forget the process that I just worked on 5 minutes before for that first eye, and I get lost because I also erase a lot and I do a lot of tweaking. Of course, the eyes don't have to be completely symmetrical, and oftentimes not keeping symmetry is a good thing in your art because it creates interest, and nothing is really symmetrical in real life. Like if you look at people's eyes, even the most perfect celebrities' eyes, they're not going to be identical. It's not a bad thing to have the eyes not be completely identical. You can copy and paste one eye to the other side and just mirror it if you would like to draw something that is looking straight towards the camera, but oftentimes if you want to do that, I recommend just erasing a couple of the lines and redrawing them so they don't look just copied and pasted. So the process that I go through for drawing eyes on the face is oftentimes I will draw the nose because it's an anchor, and the sides of the nose right where the eyes are, you're going to see these two little marks like where you would rest your glasses. I always will make sure to add that in my drawings just because I like what it looks like and I think it's a good kind of anchor and helps give the face dimension. And a lot of times I will draw the x-axis so that both eyes are on the same level, and then I draw the eyebrows and then draw the eyes as I said before, step by step drawing the same feature on one eye and then on the other, making sure it looks good, then drawing another little piece, another line on one eye then on the other. And if you can see, the distance between the two eyes is roughly around the length of one eye in between them, and the inner tear ducts will match up to basically the sides of the nose or the nostrils. And the length of the eyebrows is going to sort of be a diagonal between the nostril towards the edge of the eye, and that's where the end of the eyebrow will be. And the beginning of the eyebrow in the center is going to come in a little bit more than the nostril comes in. So just a little bit more than the tear duct, but not a too huge crazy amount unless you're drawing like a unibrow or something. Drawing expressions through eyes comes mostly, I would say, from the eyebrows. Of course, a little bit from the actual eyeballs themselves. If somebody's more surprised, their eyes are going to be a little bit more wide open, as opposed to if they're lethargic or upset or sleepy, their eyes are going to be a little bit more closed. But in general, the eye shape itself doesn't really change too much with different expressions. It's just the amount of opened and closed that the eye is going to be. The expressions themselves are kind of controlled by the eyebrows. I really hope that was helpful to you and that you maybe learned something. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe because I put out new videos every single Sunday, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye!